as an entrepreneur, you have to continue to communicate and have that conviction. You have to then find people who are going to offset the skills that you don't have. As entrepreneurs, we got to figure out, like, how do we balance that with the right people at the same time that we're still evangelizing what we're doing and how we're doing it to keep the motor running, because there's nothing worse than building a company and then it's stalling out, and then all you're doing is, now you've become a lifestyle company in the sense that your growth is sub 10% because all you're doing is selling off of your churn. A lot of people get into YPO groups. Those are great, but I would tell you, I get more benefit from having really smart people around me where I go and have lunch or dinner and we talk about these things and I get these little nuggets and they're like, man, why didn't I think about that?
So often early on, you're just trying to find any customer you can have, any partner you can have, because you feel desperate. But oftentimes those lend themselves to bad partnerships, bad investors, bad customers that give you most of the trouble. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. It just can oftentimes be there's either just a misalignment or different priorities, different goals. I'm sure you'd say you can't underscore that enough.
No, not at all. I will tell you that it is usually the number one reason for success in the continued growth of a company, or it's the number one reason why they fail.
Welcome to the Abundant Journey podcast, where we talk with incredible entrepreneurs who give world-class advice from their own journeys. I'm your host, Nick James, and I'm a commercial banker turned business owner, along with my co-host, Nick Aufenkamp. We want to help you grow and scale your business while not losing sight of what matters most. Join us as we learn from the experts what it takes to grow a $1 million business. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another Abundant Journey podcast episode. As always, Nick James hanging out with you today, and Nick Aufenkamp. We are super excited to have another amazing guest on the show today, David Metter. He is hanging out with us today, and goodness gracious, the rap sheet is long with what he's done, both as an entrepreneur, a business owner, done multiple exits from businesses, ground up investor, and currently spending a lot of his time leading legacy builders at 12 Stone Church, which some of you may wonder, what is that? Well, we're going to dive into it today. But before that, let's bring him in. David, how are you, man?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So our audience doesn't know you. Tell us a little bit about who you are. What's a day in the life look like today? Where do you live?
So we're in Atlanta, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. Everybody goes, well, Atlanta's big because it takes basically an hour to get anywhere. It doesn't matter where you are in Atlanta. But we're in a wonderful community of Brazelton, Georgia, which is kind of northeast of the city. And my wife and I live here with our dog. We have 6 kids, but they're all basically grown. Some of them act grown up, but some of them don't. But we have kids that range in age from 32 down to our twins that are 22, about to graduate from college. That's a good thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, what a exciting season of life to be moving into after raising up that many kids. And I have to mention it. So I big time Minnesota Vikings fan, was a huge Kirk Cousins fan. I'm sorry to rub salt in the wound, but as much as I love Kirk Cousins as a guy, it's been a rough season for y'all this year.
It started off poorly, then got really, really great. Yeah. And then and now we're, this is like a typical Atlanta Falcons season. We had a little hope, and then somebody just, comes and punches us right in the throat. So.
Yeah. Well, hey, I tell you what, when I start my Minnesota Vikings spinoff podcast, I'll have you on. We can unpack the Kirk Cousins legacy and all of that. But would love to get into some of your just journey into entrepreneurship and how did you, again, like Nick said, I think he put that well. The rap sheet is long, but it always starts with a first step. And so what was your introduction into the whole world of entrepreneurship?
You'll laugh, but I think it goes back to like when I was 7, 8 years old. I had a paper route, and I was always trying to figure out how to further monetize the customers that I had that I was delivering papers to. So, I would try to upsell them for better delivery options. It was just like, I think about it now, I'm like, man, what was I doing? But I think the thing that I remember most from my childhood, like I was always trying to create an experience for people, and that was fun for me. And I remember I was 8 years old, and we always hung out. Things were different back then. You just hung out. You never came home, right? But we lived in this apartment building. And during the fall, right around Halloween, I had this idea of making a kind of a cool Halloween kind of, horror type of an experience in our basement. And like nobody in the apartment building knew. There were 4 apartments. And nobody in the apartment building knew that we were doing this during the day after school. Like we rigged up this whole thing. And then I got to charge people, and people thought it was cute at first. And then I think the person who owned the apartment, or at least was the manager of the apartment, if I remember correctly, they were like, wait a minute, you're making money off of the, the space that we're, so I think that was our first and last attempt at doing a cool, Halloween experience.
Oh man. Well, yeah. I love that. Believe it or not, as we've been doing this for 2 years, we have more often than not our guests share some sort of story like that in that younger years. And clearly, Nick and I have identified that is like the blueprint for success as an entrepreneur. Did you do something in the years of like 8 to 12? And if so, you're good to go. But, I will say this now, most of the guests we've had on didn't try to upsell. Some of them were selling cookies or lemonade or badges or magnets, but nobody tried to upsell. So, clearly you were thinking ahead. I love that. So were anybody in your family entrepreneurial? What was that like growing up?
No, actually it was probably the exact opposite. I was raised by my mom for the first 9 years of my life, single parent. And obviously we lived in an apartment. We didn't live in a great area. There was a time in our lives that my mom was on assistance, food stamps, and she worked as a laborer in a pipe fitting company. If you know anything about like concrete pipes, there's nothing entrepreneurial about that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it was, as I grew up, and I was in an environment, there were no entrepreneurs. There was nothing going on. It was basically living day to day. And I think that was what turned me. This is not what I want. And so I knew what I didn't want. And I just went and searched for something that wasn't that, for sure.
Yeah. That's awesome to be able to see that at such a young age as well, of just a recognition that like, okay, there's got to be a different path, a different way to go. And so obviously you had some young experiences of getting into entrepreneurship, learning how to start to play the game, how to make some money. What did that look like as you got older? School, did you end up going to college, or when did this really take off? And like, okay, instead of just doing stuff in the basement of the apartment, actually starting to build a more legitimate business.
Yeah, I feel like I just brought the podcast down to a low level.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. This is good, man.
Yeah, I will tell you, it took some time. When you don't have options and opportunity, and if you've ever done, if you know anything about JD Vance's story, he actually grew up about 40 miles south of me in Middletown. We were in Dayton, Ohio. And it was kind of the same thing. Like people just didn't they stayed and they never got out. And so my thought, once I graduated from high school, went into college, I was like, I want to go and get out. And so the first thing that helped me, I would say, kind of think differently. I bought an old, and this is going to age me because I'm way older than you guys, is a Commodore 64 computer. and I started to learn some basic computer skills, coding. Never really got into in college. In fact, I actually failed out of college, ran out of money, and failed out of college at the same time, which is like a double negative, right? But it wasn't because I'm not a dumb guy. I just have no patience for sitting in classrooms, and that I found that was not a great skill set of mine. But as I started learning some of the skills on a personal computer, I had an opportunity to start selling cars. Believe it or not, that was my first kind of step into being my own boss. Because if you know anything about any kind of sales, there's management chain, but essentially you work for yourself. And I found very quickly that I was different than the people around me. And I wasn't going to follow that path. I actually, at that time, I put a computer on my desk. I was the first salesperson in our dealership for sure, but more importantly, probably anywhere else around, that had a personal computer that I built what is now known as a CRM, like Salesforce and other things, but I built it out of an ACT database. It was, rude looking, but it helped me build a client base, communicate differently and better with my customers. I got really good on the phone, which most salespeople, that skill kind of escapes them. And that helped open up all kinds of opportunities, from being a good salesperson and building a good client base to eventually managing a store and being a general manager of a dealership by the age of 28 years old.
Wow. No, that's fantastic. And I love that part of your story. I want to go back just a little bit. I know now, and we'll get to it, but you spent a lot of time doing some consulting work and helping folks grow and scale. I'm curious though, it seems like maybe, oftentimes greed or fear are driving forces to propel people. And really, a lot of this sounds like it was very self-education. It was like, hey, I'm going to look at things a different way. I'm going to pursue the things that other people aren't willing to do. What was that driving force for you? And maybe even a step further, as you work with folks today, what seems to be some of the main drivers that keeps people moving forward like this?
Yeah. So, for me, I think you'll see a trend of, it was, I don't want to do that, so I have to do something else. It was never, man, I see these 3 or 4 people and I love the skill sets that they have, and I'm going to, and they'll help mentor me up. Right. It was, for me, it was different. It was, I don't want to do those things. I don't know what this looks like, but I'm just going to go that way. Right. And we'll figure it out. And certainly early in my life, I did that. But I'll tell you the things that still, I would say, kind of bound me, like chains. It was selfishness and greed. I just wanted, I didn't know any better. So I just wanted to do something, be something. I remember, you kind of fake it till you make it. And I did that through high school and part of college. And even when I was, in the early years of my career. And it wasn't until probably my early to mid 30s that I had this kind of revelation moment where it turned from that selfish greed focus to, I figured out that I could be selfless and I could be serving. I could be a servant leader, and that was going to get me much farther. To answer your last part of the question, all of that stuff that happened before that, though, has served me so well in being able to mentor the founders and entrepreneurs that I work with now, because you can always say the good things that help people, but if you can come from a place, your wisdom and your discernment was from failure and or those tendencies that are not good tendencies, people tend to appreciate them, and they resonate much better than if you just say, hey, if you do this, this, and this, and these 3 skills, then you'll be great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, it's incredibly redemptive, right? That those early experiences are the things that we look back on. It's like, man, I can't believe that I was that guy. I can't believe that I did that. And yet, in time, as we grow and mature, it's amazing how those things can actually become the hard-won wisdom that we're able to use to help and serve others. And I am excited to dive into the ways that you've been able to mentor and use those experiences. Not to have us jumping back and forth here, but I did want to talk about just this purchase of the Commodore 64 computer. I mean, I can't imagine that was cheap at the time. And also just being one of the first ones to set up a PC at work and be building a CRM. Part of me is curious, like, how risky did that feel to be making that kind of an investment at that moment? And also, how did that set you apart? Like, did people think you were kind of crazy to be the only one with a computer at work?
Yeah, it was so funny and fascinating. I haven't thought about this in years. I didn't feel it was risky to purchase it. I'll tell you where kind of the stuff hit the fan. I remember putting it on my desk and getting it all set up. And I remember the other salespeople, the first, let's say, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they made fun of me, right?
Yeah.
They thought it was silly. And then what they started to see was this consistency. I didn't even, it wasn't called a CRM back then. I was generating letters, because you got to remember, this is, really before, internet connectivity and email and all that kind of stuff. So I was generating letters, and call sheets for me. And I had, scripts that I had put together. And so it went from making fun of me to then being envious, because after about a month where they saw this consistency of workflow, they were like, well, why don't I have it? And I remember the owner of the dealership coming downstairs one day, and he basically told me I had to remove it because it was putting pressure on him, because the other salespeople wanted it. And I had to basically negotiate for the next week to keep it there in order to, I had to give up some of my commission to show how convicted I was, to make sure that I kept that, because it was an important part. Funny enough, a couple months later, you started seeing other PCs start to pop up on the salespeople's desks. and so, when I ended up, as I moved through the management chain and certainly ran a store, I tried to, network, all of the machines together to build one consistent, and I couldn't do it. I wasn't smart enough. I didn't have that background. And so that's actually what, helped me take that next step. I happened to meet somebody, who was a fantastic mentor to me. That was really my first person who I looked up to. But he took me in, and we built out what was one of the probably the first, true automotive CRM, in the auto industry.
And David, being a banker, Nick being a sales guy, we both know what CRMs are. I don't know that there's anybody more equipped to explain what CRM is for our listeners, maybe who don't know what that is. Would you mind explaining that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, a CRM is a customer kind of, you can call it all kinds of relationship management systems, all of that. Essentially, it is a structured follow-up, software solution, allows, interaction from customer to, let's say, a salesperson in this case, all of that interaction to be warehoused in one area. So like, if I call you, Nick, and we're having a conversation, whether it's banking, healthcare, whatever it is, I'm able, because of the things that are in front of me related to your record, I can have a better conversation with you.
Yep.
And then ultimately, if I'm selling you a product, all of the sales are in there. So I have a history of our interaction with sales and service and all that kind of stuff. All of that combined goes into that system.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. And again, I think CRMs by and large have taken over the business world, especially in the sales realm, because you recognize it's a great way to organize and keep track of things. And as we continue on with your story, I know that that's pretty instrumental in your journey and the success that you've had. So I wanted to make sure we got that. Backing up just a little bit, as you were early there in the first guy with that on the desk, and really you were butting up against a lot of confrontation. I think that's something that's not really talked about often as an entrepreneur, is that in order to do the things that other people aren't doing and reach new heights that other people haven't reached, sometimes it's a lonely path, and sometimes you're going to meet opposition from places you don't expect it. Talk to us about that. Has maybe there been other times in your journey? Because I know you've really launched other things besides this in your career. What does that path look like? And, what is that part of the journey?
Yeah, I actually have a name for what you just explained. I call it the crab in the bucket. And what we see this all over the place, whether it's in our personal lives or in our professional careers. When that owner of the dealership came down and essentially said, you can't have that there, it felt like, in that place, it was, instead of having people elevate up, you have people, and this is the crab in the bucket. Crabs, if you put them in a bucket, you don't even have to put a lid on them, because the other crabs will pull a crab down if that crab tries to get out of the bucket, right? And so in that scenario, I felt like I was trying to get out of the bucket. I was elevating not only what I was doing and how I was doing it within the dealership, but he owned the dealership, and I was elevating the dealership. And eventually, as the story goes, the other salespeople started doing it. We became a better dealership. But we see this in business. We see this in our personal lives. We see it in society, where there are a lot of people who don't necessarily like people to get going. And that's where they become the crab in the bucket. And you see that with entrepreneurs all the time. They have to fight through some of that just minutia of, pulling people back down into the abyss. It's horrible.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah.
But that's, if that's, I think that's one of the skill sets of an entrepreneur that is mostly not noticed. It's because everybody just kind of is okay with here. Mm-hmm. And entrepreneurs are not okay with there. They're always wanting to go up. There's always something more. There's always something different. And that's where we get great innovation, and we get, that's how we get rockets that can land themselves somehow. I don't even know how that works. Right?
Yeah.
I still thought that was a video going in reverse.
Right.
But that is a great definition of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
I think I haven't heard that analogy before, or at least applied to entrepreneurship, but I think that's dead on. That's certainly, I felt that in my own experience. I think that most entrepreneurs have felt that sort of resistance, and it's still always so surprising, because especially when you're achieving success, when you're doing good things, and in your case, serving a dealership where you're making the dealership more money, it's like, whoa, why in the world are you trying to make this hard? But you're right, we do get so comfortable with the status quo, and there's a lot of ego and those kinds of things that are involved. And I think that the spirit of entrepreneurship, right, is recognizing that, hey, there's a better way to do things. And whenever you call out that there's a better way, it speaks to inefficiencies, or just says that what we're currently doing is not the best. And people can get surprisingly defensive about that. With the CRM, I mean, it's wild to me, because some of the largest businesses really in the world right now, you think of Salesforce and HubSpot. I mean, these are massive businesses, and you were so early into this whole world of building a CRM. And so I'd really love to hear, as we speak about resistance and making changes and doing big, wild things. You mentioned that you had a partner in the business that you were able to help build with. What did that look like? Just an exciting time, I imagine, with like taking this pretty rudimentary technology to, where things are today and being part of building it amid all of that.
Yeah, it was, so I happened to meet him at an event, and they had just gotten started. They had 3 employees. They had probably less than 10 dealerships that were utilizing what they had come up with in a solution. And I never felt like I was going to be an owner of a dealership. I didn't have the financial means. I didn't have the backing. My heart was in tech, and I loved building things. And so I saw this as a great opportunity. He asked me to join. So I was employee number 4. And here's the great thing. I am a person who, like, when I say this, I mean this, you don't know what you don't know. So I go into this and I go, okay, this is going to be great. Well, they had one other person who was selling, and he had the entire country. Clearly, because there's 3 employees, right? But he had the entire country for his sales map. And he was so mad when he found out that I was going to sell. And so he didn't want to give me any territory. And I convinced Brian Anderson, the founder of the company. I said, just give me Ohio. That's where I lived at the time. I said, just give me Ohio. That's all I need. Like, that's it. And so the first month, I ended up selling 5 deals to dealerships because it was easy for me. I could go tell the story that I just told you. And I was like, this is what I did. And this is how I did it. And this is why it's important. And this is what happens. And here's the outcome. And you have to believe me because I sold cars. I managed a store, and I was a general manager of a dealership. And this is how it runs. And they were, okay. And there had never been a deal, because they only had, less than 10 deals. There was never a deal where they signed it the first time that they heard the demonstration, the pitch. And all of my deals ended up closing the day that I went in, and they were like, in fact, I remember the first time it happened, I didn't even have a contract. I had to call Brian. I said, hey, they want to sign. He goes, what do you mean they want to sign? I go, they want to sign. Like, they're going to. Yeah. And he goes, well, how does that work? And I said, that's exactly what I'm calling you. So here's the first thing. I had to run down to, I think there were Kinko's at the time, and print out the contract and bring it back. And so when we did that first deal, the next day he sent me a portable printer. And so the remaining deal. So we changed because I didn't know what I didn't know. Yeah. Its behavior of how we were selling. Eventually, there are 1,100. There's probably more now, but 1,150 franchise dealerships in the state of Ohio. And at one point in time, we had over 500 of them. And eventually, clearly, my role changed, and and I led our sales force for a few years. But we had thousands of dealerships that were on our solution. It was a great success story until it wasn't. And that's a good segue.
Yeah, I was going to say, dun, dun, dun. Like, let's hear that.
Yeah. So, it's hard because, when you're first in a market, first mover, you have to do a lot of education. And so you're not just displacing another system like you would be now, like, Salesforce to HubSpot. You are basically educating people to go from paper and go into, and they have no computer training, by the way. So the overhead on people in a CRM group in that initial stage was overwhelming. So as much as we were selling, the overhead was consuming because there's so much turnover in car dealerships. And so there's constant training. It became this crazy thing. And so we decided to bring in investment capital. And this was really my first experience with other people's money. And what I found out of that was not all money is the same, which is one of the leading principles when I work with founders now. There are so many opportunities for so many different investors to come into companies, and most people pick the wrong one.
Interesting.
And in that case, we did. And about a year later, I was gone. And a couple of years later, most of the management team was gone, and they eventually sold the business. So it was a good outcome, but it wasn't a great outcome. And I learned a ton from that experience, and have kept that in my heart for this entire time as I work with different investment bankers, private equity, VCs, and matching them up with our founders, because that'll undo a company or that'll help a company greatly succeed.
I'd love to unpack that further. Like
Yep.
Not all money is the same. Like that's obviously a poignant line. And so what were some of the things that made the money, the investors that you took on a bad fit, and even bringing it into present tense, like as you talk about working with the founders that you're connected with, what are some of the principles that you have in place for determining what's the money that's right for you and your business?
Yeah, without getting into details of that specific deal, I can tell you that there has to be faith in keeping the existing management team. You also have to have an investor that has a sense of the industry and specifically the business. And then for them to also have confidence in the management team. Those things that sounds common sense, right? But back then, I mean, we're talking about the early 2000s. There weren't a ton of private equity or venture capital groups that had great knowledge of either the auto industry or the tech industry. And that's why you saw a lot of the failures of the early 2000s, because people were just throwing money at a lot of things that they had no idea why, and what and how they were being built. And that's why a lot of investors lost a lot of money. But I think there was an overcorrection in deals like ours where the investors said, well, we know better. Even though we don't know your industry and we don't really understand, how your product works and all that kind of, they think they do because they did some, due diligence. But that's where some of those cracks end up coming up. And so as I look for the right fit for, as we recap business, or if we're looking to sell off of a business, we care greatly about the people that are in those businesses that have helped grow those businesses. And we look for the right alignment. Do these investors understand the space? And I can sniff that out pretty quickly. Plus, most of them now we know, so it's easy to make those determinations. But even if we don't know them, you have senses, and most of them are common senses, right? You can pick up things, as you're looking at these potential investors. And I wish I would have had some of that discernment. I was just like stupid and young, and you don't know any better. But those life experiences have certainly helped. I always joke. I go, the 55-year-old me now would have hated the 33-year-old me, right? And the 33-year-old me would have definitely not listened to the 55-year-old me.
Yeah.
Hey, Nick, that gives us hope, right? In our early to mid 30s.
That's right. No doubt. Oh man.
That's good.
And it actually, that principle reminds me of really what Jason Bright had said. And I know there's a mutual acquaintance there with Jason. We had him and his business partner on, and he talked about that even from a financial advising standpoint of so often early on, you're just trying to find any customer you can have, any partner you can have, because you feel desperate. But oftentimes those lend themselves to bad partnerships, bad investors, bad customers that give you most of the trouble. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. It just can oftentimes be there's either just a misalignment or different priorities, different goals. And so I think that speaks really well to even a lot of the folks we've had on the podcast where they raise capital and for their different projects. So really being sure of who you're partnering with and making sure that there's alignment. I'm sure you'd say you can't underscore that enough.
No, not at all. I will tell you that it is usually the number one reason for success in the continued growth of a company, or it's the number one reason why they fail. A lot of people think it's lack of innovation, blah, 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 blah. But most of those things that they would tie into it will come back to the money that you took and the alignment that you have, with that investment group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of taking money, maybe we can shift into just the idea of scaling a business, because this is something that you've thought a lot about. And as we've been doing the podcast and getting to know our listeners better and better, most of the folks that are engaging with the episode here are business owners, and many of them are just trying to scale their business such that they can cross that $1 million a year threshold. Which can be a difficult spot to be in. And so I would love to hear, whether it's from your story or just general principles that you've worked out about how to scale, what you need in place to scale, what kind of vision you got to have, how you did it.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot to unpack. I'll use the example of the company that we ended up starting in 2011, and actually it goes back to a lot of testing. It goes back to 2007. You have to. Have you ever seen the movie? You probably, if you have kids, you've seen the movie Robots, right?
Oh yeah.
And they talk about you see a need, you fill a need, and if you see the need and you figure out a way to build this out. And you have that conviction, then things move forward. And I'll tie this up. So in 2007, we saw this real inherent need to use a lot of data that was going on in the consumer side to be able to change behavior of customers in that purchase journey of an automobile. And we knew we had to do it with automation and not with changing behavior of customers. Because remember when I said you have to spend a lot of time and money to try to train people, and it never really worked. So let's just figure out automation. So we continue to go through these tests. And in 2011, we were part of our bigger business. We had an auto sector, we had a retail sector, and a travel sector. And they essentially all kind of did the same thing. We were trying to change behavior, and we had to go sell that to these three different buckets. And with travel, and I'm talking about our company Hook Logic, and great founders of that business who were really super smart, and they went and sold that concept to, everybody knows Expedia, and Expedia had an issue with people searching like the library, but then going somewhere else to purchase. And that didn't serve Expedia well. And in retail, they had the same kind of problems. I won't go into that because there's all kinds of different vendors and retailers there. But in auto, we knew that they were doing the same thing. They were searching, but they weren't coming in. And in an auto purchase, you like to have to physically come into a dealership, where in travel and retail, you can buy stuff online. And so I explain all of this and you're going, well, okay, where are you going with this? I think what happened was we were able to sell that internally and we were convicted of it, but we had to go sell people and change all of the ways that they were thinking about those three different businesses. And that was tough. And then we had to go and convince somebody who had money who would give it to us to go and do that. And that was really tough. And that's when I figured out, I knew that I was a decent communicator, in the early parts of my career. And even when I was growing up, that was a skill. Like if I had a superpower, that would be it. Right. But I was okay with having the hard conversations, and those were hard conversations, and most people didn't want to have them. And so I was part of this great founder team, and we went and had these hard conversations, both to people who we had to change their minds in the way that they were going to do business in auto and travel and retail. And thankfully, we were skilled in all three of those areas to do that, but also to go and have the conversations with the investors and sell them on this concept. And, lo and behold, it all worked out. Like, there's a happy ending to that. But we were convicted in what we did and how we did it. And we were able to communicate it to a number of different people and continue that storytelling with factual data. You can't just continue to tell stories, but factual data that backed it up and validation. And it got us to, a fantastic finish line exit, with that company and the way that we split it up and ultimately ended up selling it off.
I love that. I want to lean in there even just a little further. So communication and conviction, I think you're right, are the baseline of sales and business. Talk a little bit about that entrepreneur, like Nick was saying, who's really wearing all the hats. Yeah. They're trying to run operations. They're trying to be the sales, the face of the business, the innovator, somebody in that, is it true that communication and conviction will push you through? I'm just thinking those early days for you, you have to make those two as core pillars in what you're doing. And what does that look like maybe practically?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to have those, I think. And what I didn't talk about was how those two skill sets also help you internally to continue to have your team rise to the occasion, because they all have to do a lot of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Way more than what their job sheets said that they were doing, right? Yeah. And so I would tell you that I think as an entrepreneur, you have to continue to communicate and have that conviction. You have to then find people who are going to offset the skills that you don't have. And there are, like for me, there are skills like I am not great with people management. I just have low tolerance for some things that I feel like we need to go at 90 miles an hour, and some other people are just not built to go 90 miles an hour. But the skill set that they have at 60 miles an hour are far better and different than what I have at 90 miles an hour, because I'll miss a couple of things. And so as you build businesses, and most entrepreneurial people will know this when I say this, you'll get out of the gate fast, and whatever your business is, you'll get customers that are paying you, and you'll get to a certain level. And in the SaaS business, it's typically 500 to 600 customers that are paying you on a monthly basis. And then all of a sudden you're still selling, but you're still at that 500 to 600 because your churn, the retention goes down, your churn goes up, and they haven't figured out why. Like, why would people leave? Well, it's because they're not hearing the story and the awesomeness and the conviction that you as a founder have talked about, because you're on to other things. And now you've got salespeople who are selling, but they're not selling at the same emotional clip that you were. And you don't have really good people who have different skills than you taking care of your customers and making sure they're communicating the value and validation of why they have the system. And so that's where you see most companies kind of stall out, right? And as entrepreneurs, we got to figure out, like, how do we balance that with the right people at the same time that we're still evangelizing what we're doing and how we're doing it, and to keep the motor running, because there's nothing worse than building a company and then it's stalling out, and then all you're doing is, now you become a lifestyle company in the sense that your growth is sub 10% because all you're doing is selling off of your churn.
Mm-hmm. So the obvious question to that is, what's the antidote, the remedy to that? I mean, because there's one of you, right? I mean, we've talked at length. As you know, we recently had somebody on that 0 to million mark. You're climbing a different mountain than the 1 million to 10 million mark. It's a totally different game you're playing. And so you have to be able to systematize. You have to be able to create converts, almost like you're saying, to be able to share that message. But you can't be that guy forever in order to continue to scale. So how do you make that shift?
Yeah, I think awareness is the number one thing. And so surrounding yourself with people who you trust, even on a friendly basis. Like I have a mentor kind of friend network. And as I do anything, as I build anything, whether it's personal or, in business, I want people to help call me out. So I'll have conversations about things that are going on with our different business ventures. And because I'm in the box, I don't necessarily see those things. Entrepreneurs, when they're in the box, they don't necessarily see those things. They surround themselves, and they don't have to go pay a bunch of people to tell them this. They can have great friend networks, peer networks that will help them, because they're outside of the box, identify these things faster than what they might catch. Especially in the example I gave you, there's nothing worse than being 6 months into it and seeing that your customer count has not really gone up, and yet you've sold somehow 180 new accounts, but you've churned 180 accounts. Like, that's not when you want to find that out. You want to find that out, and hopefully that peer network of people. A lot of people get into YPO groups; those are great, but I would tell you, I get more benefit from having really smart people around me, where I go and have lunch or dinner and we talk about these things, and I get these little nuggets, and they're like, man, why didn't I think about that? Well, it's because I am not outside the box. I'm in the box, and I'm in this day-to-day kind of motion.
Yeah, that's really, really well said. Having those peer networks, having some people that can see outside of the current frame, the tunnel vision that you get. And I know that frustration of feeling like you're playing whack-a-mole within your business, of, trying to do the customer acquisition. And yet you also need to give equal, if not more, emphasis to making sure that you're fulfilling the promises to your existing customers and keeping them on. And that can be a difficult sort of deal. You talked about, hiring a little bit earlier as well. That's something that I'd like to visit too, because a lot of people feel like, well, okay, I can just hire my way out of problems. And it sounds like the human capital piece was a big issue for you in the first endeavor. I love what you said about automation and education, and being able to automate is a whole lot easier. But how do you think about hiring, especially as you're scaling a business?
Yeah. So this is not my skill set.
Okay.
I said it earlier.
Right. Yeah. Not.
I am more, this is where, my kids even make fun of me, my wife, like, I'm more robotic, because if I can automate something, if I can figure out how to engineer that, I will completely do it. And then, at the height of our auto practice at Hook Logic, I think we had 26 employees.
Oh, wow.
But we had, 8,000, 9,000 dealers and 7 OEMs on the program. So, I mean, I love scalability.
I would have thought that you would have had 260 employees. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. I am all about that piece. Yeah. And so what I do is I rely on people who are way better at people, recruitment and management. And my wife and I, she is a lifelong, she's retired now, but a lifelong auto tech person as well. And so whenever I came out of a business meeting yesterday, it's our latest investment, and there are 4 needs, and they're asking me for names, and I go, okay, I see the positions. Let me go have a conversation with someone else. And my wife is so much better at that. But we've found that if you bring the right people in, they can make all the difference. And now we have kind of a network in our little fiefdom, that we move from company to company because we trust them, we know them, we don't have to go and vet them. But I would tell you that if you don't have that, the best thing, and this goes back to not all money's the same, if you bring the right investors in and have the right board members and structure in a growing company, let's say, usually when tech companies in our space get to about 5 million in annual revenue, that's when they start to seek some investment capital. That is the most important time to make sure you get the right people in, because they also have the networks and the recruiting engines to bring in the right people. But if you bring in the wrong people and they don't have all of those things, or if they bring the wrong people into your organization, as I used in the example from our first tech endeavor, that's when things can, go awry.
Yeah.
I feel like I gave you a fluffy answer.
No, I think that's really important, and it ties in really well with that whole point of not all money being made the same, because it's not just that the investors need to be on board with your management, understand the industry, but there's the other side, like that your investors are not just bringing capital, but they're bringing full networks. I love how you said that with the recruiting engine and the networks that they have, and it puts another layer on that importance of actually the investor. It's not just the money that they bring. It might be even more important, the people that they give you and your business access to. And so I think that's really helpful and something that's often missed as businesses are trying to scale. I know as we're winding down, there's a million different things that I'd love to keep talking about, but one of the things that's been in the background that we really haven't hit on too much, but that I know is really important to Nick and I, important to our listeners, one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on, as we were starting the episode, you talked about having 6 kids and a family, and in the midst of 2 very successful businesses that you were part of, pretty rapid growth in both of them. So what did that, getting a bit more personal here, share as much as you'd like, but what were some of the things that you put in place or lessons that you learned in trying to keep business in its right place, as well as prioritize things at home?
Well, we sold our business in 2015, and then another piece in 2016. But from 2015 on, I made a conscious decision. I wasn't going to go build another company. And we had already had 3 kids that had graduated high school at that point and were either in college or had gone through college. And we had our 3 younger kids, a daughter and then our twin daughters, and they were still at home. And that conscious decision to be present was because in those previous years, I hadn't. I always made time for our kids in sports events and our family events, but I traveled a ton. When you're growing a business, that's what happens. And so I wanted the opposite of that. And so we made a decision not to take a primary role in any company. And instead, we were going to start looking at investing and advising companies that were, in our space. But being home and being present, you could literally see the difference. Our 3 older kids are fantastic, but the 3 younger kids, you can see the impact that it made on my wife and I both being home and present around them, and the pathway that they have taken in that time period. It has changed us. And as that happened, we started implementing more family meetings. We've always been a great family of experiences and getting together and doing all kinds of things like that. But now we have very specific family meetings where we talk, over communicate, our values and the things that are important to us. And that has really led to a fantastic family dynamic, within our family.
I love that, David. That's awesome.
I love that as well. And maybe speak to, again, trying to go just a little deeper here. As you were growing, as you were scaling, it demanded so much and it demanded that effort. Is it possible to grow and scale without, we like to say, without losing your soul, without those years and reflecting back? So maybe less about your journey and maybe just more advice to somebody who's in that grind, who is trying to get to a point where they can bring on the right people or they don't have to wear 15 different hats. I mean, what would you say to that person today? Just curious.
Well, most people don't want to hear my answer. John Maxwell's, if you know John, we're fortunate that within our church, we have great connections to John Maxwell, and he's this amazing leader guru, written 100 books. He usually says, hey, I'll give you the 5 principles of leadership, but you don't want to hear the last one. And for me, the last one was, and I think I mentioned this, if you remember my story of my youth, it was just survival and not wanting to be that. And then you have this transition. And in my early 30s, I had this kind of revelation. It was around my faith and how that was going to ground me. And instead of being selfish and self-serving, I was going to figure out how to be more selfless and serve the people in my family, in our church, in our businesses. And in that moment, I kid you not, Nick, the something turned, and we had amazing success in the business, that we were running, and it just felt like everything that we touched. Not everything went wonderfully, but everything that it just, we should have never been able to build and sell our company in 5 years. Should have never happened.
Yeah.
Never. Right. But the acceleration of all of those things, I think, was for a greater purpose for us to be able to spend more time with our kids and volunteer more in our church and to be connected with more faith-based core groups. I was in a year leadership program of men that just completely changed my life. I believe Jason Bright he may have talked about that in his life. And what I didn't realize, I felt like I was being tested in a good way to ultimately get to a place where I now can pour into all of these different entrepreneurs, in a way that I could have never done 10 or 15 years ago, and equally be able to lead a group within our church that has the spiritual gift of giving. There's over 500 of them. And to be able to communicate what we're doing and how we're doing it, I could have never done those things if I wouldn't have gone through that journey and transitioned from that whole selfish mindset to a selfless mindset.
Yeah. And we've talked about it somewhat implicitly here, but just to make it explicit, I assume what you're referring to is the legacy builders at 12 Stone Church, that this program. So how exactly is that group defined?
Yeah. So we've led, my wife and I have led legacy builders at 12 Stone for about 4 years now. And what it is, it's a group of people who have the spiritual gift of giving. And that means that they give over the tithe. That does not mean that they're a bunch of wealthy people and we go out golfing all the time. In fact, we've never done that. We have people who have the spiritual gift of giving that are single moms. We have a high schooler who has the spiritual gift of giving. She gives over the tithe, and it brings her great joy. But we also have great business leaders that have that same spiritual gift, and it's fascinating how we can come together and see the vision of our church, and then come alongside, in most cases, secretly, and be able to go and fund that vision. And so I never imagined ever in my early years that I would be led to be on staff and part of a ministry that does things like this. And yet my whole life has been kind of this book in certain chapters of trusting God. And for us, I don't have the ability to go and minister to people, but I certainly have the ability to go fund ministry to people. And nothing brings my wife and I greater joy. And for us to go and do it alongside 500 other people is just crazy.
No doubt. That's awesome, man.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's an awesome segue into our last section here, and maybe to just even put kind of a bow on it, because we love really landing the plane with the why and the heartbeat. And so let's dive a little further. Oftentimes we go with our gold nugget round of questions, but I think you get to come at these with a little bit of a different perspective, because a lot of times as we have guests on, they share, hey, this is what I'm passionate about. This is the ways I like to give, but you are surrounded by people who have a similar heartbeat. So I want you to kind of think through that lens as we talk. So number one, gold nugget questions here. Why is it important to have an abundance versus scarcity mindset?
Because I think we are ordered and tasked and, given the opportunity to help others. And I think that, when we have abundance and you have the right mindset, you have God's favor and going to do those things.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it shows by the ministry that you guys have, the things you are stewarding in the ways that you've been given. So I love that. Next one here. Are you a journey or destination person, and how has that impacted where you are today?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say the easy answer would be the destination, because I like logistics and figuring out how to get there. But, I kind of enjoy the journey. It's kind of fun.
Well, with 6 kids, right?
Yeah. And it makes for good stories. And I love, I'm an introvert by nature. So it's hard for me to go and just communicate, like you just go and start talking. But if you give me a story that I can go tell, I'm good. I feel comfortable.
I love that. And I think you're the only guest who has referred to it a few times as a story. And that's one of the reasons why Nick and I do this podcast. Is we started with the line, everybody's got a story to tell. Yeah. And, so thank you for being on, sharing your story and your journey with us. But I just think about that, because that is what propels not only life and business and relationships. It's all of it intertwined, but it's our stories. And so speaking of that, in that same vein, we talk about the 5 F's of abundant journey: family, faith, fitness, finance, and future. Okay. What's one of those that you're focused on looking into the year ahead and something you're working on?
Yeah, I would say family for sure. We are, it's nice. This will be the first time that we're home for Christmas in 10 years. We had another home somewhere else, so a number of those years were there, but we're having almost all the family here. It's hard when they start to get married and they have in-law commitments, but we when we do that and we get everyone together at Christmas, gives us the opportunity to obviously be connected. But I mentioned earlier, like family meetings. So we'll sit down and we, and we over communicate, all kinds of things, from finances to our faith walk to, values within our family, just so that there's no question. And as we get older, I know this sounds really kind of morbid, we want to make sure that our kids understand exactly what our intentions are. And I'll give you a great example of that. Our kids know that they're not going to inherit a ton from us. We are a giving family. And so if you communicate that early on and you show that with great examples, you're not going to get this weird friction and you see this a lot. This is weird to me, but you see this a lot where, kids expect X from their family, and our family doesn't expect that, because we've done a good job over the last 5 years to communicate that. We'll continue to do that so that they understand. And then we season it. when we educate like that, but we season it and show examples. So like 2 years ago, we opened up donor advised funds for each one of our kids. And we put money in there instead of gifts. We don't typically do gifts for Christmas, except for the grandkids, because, we spoil them. But we put money in there and we told them about it. And then 3 days later, we got together and we talked about what did you donate to and why did you donate it? And those are the things that help to build those muscles of how we run our family, so that when 30 years from now or 40 years from now, let's say 50 years from now, hopefully, when they see our wishes, it's not foreign to them. They understand exactly why we're giving money to our church in our legacy. And this is why we're doing this for these events. And we're just not splitting it up 6 ways, I guess is the way I'd finish that.
That's awesome. And I haven't heard that before, but what a different approach to not only legacy planning, but giving and generosity. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Last question here. What is a dream or goal you have that you've not been able to make happen yet?
This is so bad. I don't want to end the podcast on this. I love cars, right? Coming from the car, I love cars.
Yeah.
And I've never been one to collect cars. I don't do that. I don't believe in that. I think other people should, because then I can go look at their car.
Yeah, right.
Awesome. But there is a car that I want, that eventually, my hope, my dream is in the next 5 years, I'll own this car. It's an old Porsche 356 and not a replica. Like, I want an original, with no top on it. And so that's my dream. And so if I can get some of my great, entrepreneurial, people to continue to build out their companies, and we can give off of those, I might be able to sneak in that 350.
That's right. Hey, and when you do, let us know. I'd love to make a trip down and go for a ride with you. The Porsches have been a big thing, especially for my dad and I. Always loving the history of the car company there, and the 911s. And actually, last year for his 60th birthday, we rented him a classic Porsche for the day and bombed around in that. It was awesome. So I love that dream. But David, man, this is so good to get to connect with you. I'm really grateful for you sharing your story, as well as the wisdom that you've learned along the way with Nick and I, with our listeners. It's amazing everything that you're doing too with legacy builders at your church, and all of the different entrepreneurs that you're able to connect with, the way that you're able to cultivate this spirit of radical generosity. It just so many awesome things here. For folks that do want to learn more about you or learn more about legacy builders, just follow along with what you're up to. Are you active on social media, or is there anywhere that you would point them to go?
I'd like to say that I'm really super active on social media, yet I'm not. Sure. I just, every once in a while I'll post. So if you want to follow me, you'll see 3 to 4 posts a year, maybe.
Nice.
But you can at 12 Stone, if you follow us on Instagram or Facebook, or those are our 2 primary channels. But on 12stone.com, you can look up Legacy and you can see all the cool stuff that we're doing.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely include links to that, as well as to some of your social media channels in the show notes, so that listeners can check those out, looking out for those quality over quantity posts from you throughout the year. But man, this is awesome. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Like always, do subscribe to the show, leave us a review. And of course, if there's anything in here that has stood out to you that you've appreciated, let us know either by leaving a comment, or better yet, sending this to somebody else who would benefit from it. That's an extension of that spirit of generosity, sharing things that you found value in. So thank you, everybody. Really grateful for the time.
Thank you.